Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to Deadzone Rogue. This is the game that we're going to have a look at today. Now, ordinarily I have a bit of a spiel about doing overviews and just spending a couple of hours with the game. This is a bit of an exception to the rule. I've been hoovering this up. I've played many hours. According to Steam, at the time of this recording, I've got 44 and a half hours on record, and 23 of them has been in the last 2 weeks. So I've played a lot of this game. I'm a very big fan. So, you know, we can just front load with that. I think it's quite excellent. Also, if you might be having a deja vu moment, because we looked at this when it went into early access a couple of months ago, which is wild. Early access done correctly and actually successfully. It is possible. And if you're not across it, I'm very skeptical of early access. It's a very much a tarnished way of doing games these days. Using the good intentions as an exception to get the rule through, which generally speaking is shovelware, flimsy alpha builds of an interesting idea, attempting to get funding and hoping it'll go viral and then maybe they can turn it into a game after they release it. But all of that aside, Deadzone Rogue is an excellent example of it done well. So yeah, I did a video of it previously, a couple of months ago. In a way, this is a part 2 or a companion piece, because much of what I said there still remains the same. Main differences is there are 3 acts to this game and the way that it's created around, you know, the actual biomes, the runs, and the 3rd act is what got added in this release. So it sort of puts a conclusion to the story. It adds some new mechanics, which are very welcome, especially if you're, let's say, a veteran of the first 2 acts and you're really wondering what they put in the 3rd one. Well, that's synergies, but I don't want to get ahead of myself and assume that you've seen the previous video. It wouldn't hurt if you'd watched that, but we'll unpack this from the bottom. What Deadzone Rogue is a pretty meat and potatoes roguelite. However, at the core of it, it has a very solid shooter gameplay loop. I've got a bunch of people in my community and friends list. Everyone's playing it. I'm playing it with multiple different groups for different runs. Examples like Destiny seems to come up quite a bit, and also the comparison gently between this and something like the Battlefield 6 open beta that we're playing, in that it has actually very tight and clean gunplay in this game, much like Battlefield. And the reason to stress that is because another thing that I'm a little bit allergic to these days is roguelites, because developers have figured out that they can kind of copy-paste something like a Slay the Spire that is already functionally and structurally sound, so they can copy it 99% and put a pretty weak core loop in, relying instead of the moment-to-moment, second-to-second gameplay to carry the game, and more the, I don't know what you would call it, and people might write papers on it, but there is an almost addiction attachment to roguelite mechanics and the outsourcing of upgrades between each run. So you end up with a lot of roguelite slop is what I'm trying to get at, where the core loop isn't that good, but it taps almost the gambling part of people's brains, where they'll just do one more run to unlock another percentage of upgrades or whatever for the next run afterwards, basically staying on a treadmill of mediocrity. So this stands apart again because the moment to moment is what really carries it. Arguably the roguelite stuff, the upgrading 1% here and there, is kind of weak, but necessary as well with the scaling. The strength of enemies as the acts go on require you to scale with them, so it does its job, but there is an inversion, and that's kind of why it's successful. So yes, the moment to moment is really fun. Basically, you'll pick an act, you'll pick a mission, there will be side missions with them, and funnily enough, the rewards go beyond just percentage currency increase or whatever, right? A lot of the time it will be unlocking new things in your augment loot pool, or the ability to re-roll things, or even just advantages like you might be guaranteed a rare item in the first drop that you pick from 3. So they're actually really interesting and helpful upgrades, which makes you incentivized to do the side missions, which in turn will be gimmick missions. They'll be things like only using sniper rifles or shotguns, that sort of stuff. They're a good diversion, they mix it up. It's kind of how side content should be. So you pick your run, and ultimately it is going through this spaceship. There is a whole story. I don't really want to ruin it. It's thin, but there's enough there, right? And this is another phenomenon we talk about. It's not trying to be carried by the story, but it gets us in the door, right? You start playing it, you go, wow, this game feels good. This plays well. Now you're interested. Now an okay story will be a bit of, flavoring on the top of your meal. So the story's good. You're playing this again. I compared him to Soldier 76 previously. It might be the same voice actor, I don't know, but they're going for a sort of gravelly, almost Duke Nukem-esque voice. Well, sans sexual everything. But he's basically woken up with amnesia on this colony ship and they don't really know what's going on. Where are the crew? Why is it just sitting in orbit around Earth? Questions that need answering. So there is a thread. There is a thriller, narrative, inquisitive hook that will keep you going along. A lot of it is just meted out in, iPad entries along the way that you'll piece the story together. The truth is, it doesn't really matter that much. This game is designed to be played 3-player co-op. You can play it solo. I've played it a little solo. It's kind of a different experience. I'm not afraid to say it's a worse experience. You really want to rally the boys around this. Get a bunch of lads in Discord and get around it. And then you synergize your builds off of each other as you go. That's the way to play this game. And sort of the inverse impact of that is when you're all talking shit and build craft and just enjoying the meat of the game, the story kind of goes out the window. So you don't talk about it that much. You're not that interested. So it's good. It's fine. I'm glad it's there. I'm enjoying it. But also, a lot of the guys in the group that I played with regularly, if you asked them what the story was, they wouldn't have a fucking clue. So yeah, you do your run and it's a string of little zones of the ship. And, you have some variance in biomes. You get the space bar and different sort of industrial areas. Sometimes there'll be puzzle platforming, and it's cool because, like I said, I played a lot of the first 2 acts, and the 3rd act adds a lot of new, interesting stuff to the ship. Again, I don't want to talk about it or give any of that away. And as you go into a room, you'll get like a grace period. Each of the 3 of you will be stealthed, perma-stealth, you could say. And as soon as you pull the trigger, you unstealth and start aggroing everything. So there is a sort of intro in the first 10-20 seconds of an engagement where you can tactically slice the pie and figure out where in that room you want to actually start from and how you want to do it. A good example would be if the front, as soon as the door opens, if it's just front loaded with enemies, pulling the trigger immediately might be a death sentence. So you go around, you decide what you're going to do. You engage, you wipe them. It's one of those things that only takes, a minute or whatever. Learn all the different enemies and their types and yada, yada, yada. And then you essentially build craft around that. At the end of each room, you'll get some sort of reward. Very roguelite, of course. And in your kit, you have weapons and armor. Armor's a little bit more basic. You pretty much just pick it up along the way and, you want to upgrade rarities and levels. So a lot of this is fairly intuitive. You have primary and secondary weapons. You have a melee and a grenade. So those 4 are the cornerstones of everything. And then beyond that, you have other things like the ability to get elemental procs. So you might end up having a fire gun or a cryo pistol or something like that. And so you may find yourself building into different disciplines depending on the roguelite unlocks you have. Some of them will favor ADS, some will be like hip fire, some will be like ammo. They'll double the capacity of the ammo and you'll get bonus elemental proc depending on how many bullets are missing from your gun, right? So there's a lot there and it's really fun and varied. Borderlands came up as well. Someone said, well, Borderlands 1 in a way. The variability of the guns and the way that you build it out, that reminds them of that, which I think is a fair call. There's all other things. Weak points are clearly denoted in the little numbers that fly out of their head. They're sort of like an orange circle, and that's hitting someone in the head, or, certain turrets have weak points like on the foot, on the base of them. There's a crit component as well, so there's a % chance you could crit no matter where you hit someone, and then there's crit damage. So there's all these different avenues that allow you to build in different ways, and you can come up with some really radical stuff. And that's what the real magic, the secret sauce to what makes this work, and we'll put a bow on this and start finishing up, but it's got that same thing that Risk of Rain 2 has, and I use that as the high watermark constantly, of a 0 to hero power scale, where you'll start the game doing 0 damage pretty much, just chipping away, but very quickly, if you build your build right, you will ramp up to Superman status and become an absolute monstrous synergy machine. Speaking of synergies, that was the sort of gimmick that they added on the 3rd act of this. The first act is just general roguelite upgrades, 1% extra damage or HP. The second act introduced items that can do some pretty radical stuff. like the ability for your secondary weapon to proc your primary weapon when you fire it at a lower percentage or whatever. So you could potentially make some sort of synergy weapon that procs all your different stuff if you're clever about it. So there's some radical changes there. And synergies is much more akin to something like a set bonus that you might get from a legendary set in a Diablo or something like that. And all the info's there on the screen. It's a lot of wall of text, but by the time you're in Act 3, you're someone who's played this game for hours, you're already invested, so it's a welcome complexity. And basically it'll be things like, here's a set bonus, you know, every time you shoot, a random element goes on the enemy. So that's very powerful and very radical. Other ones like, there's like a fireworks one. Your grenade occasionally explodes into 3 or 4 grenades. Like some pretty insane high-end end game augmentation, but it would require you to get a combination of 5 different items, and there'll probably be a pool of like 8 items. So as long as you get 5 of those 8, you'll be able to unlock that synergy. Anyway, it is a welcome thing that adds depth to the end game part of the run. So look, let's wrap it up there. I feel like this is a value add, even though we did do a video a couple of months ago. It bore at least celebrating that this made it to 1.0 in a really clean time frame. I will say that at least on day 1, there were a lot of bugs introduced. Some pretty bad ones, things like when you'd respawn, things like if you managed to die after the end of the wave, which, you know, you might have had poison on you or a bullet randomly hit you a split second after you completed the wave. It was bricking our run. Your guy wouldn't respawn. You had to actually reset the entire lobby and lose everything. So that was just one example. We still got some other bugs, some weird stuff, like someone will pull out his sniper rifle and it starts firing like a machine gun and glitching out. And yeah, so there are some bugs that have seemed to have been introduced with the implementing of the 1.0, but nothing to really make me say don't buy this game. It's excellent. If you do have a 3-man group on standby that want to play this, you shouldn't hesitate. It's worth it. It's worth playing right now. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.